so much for joining the special Carnegie Mellon in-person fireside chat and networking dinner with Dr. Anish Shah, the MD and CEO of Mahindra. A big thank you to the Mahindra team for this lovely venue, Sahu, Monica, Charmaine, Renuji. My name is Aashay Doshi. I'll be running today's interview. Before we start, I'd like to invite Rekha Koita, who runs the CMU Mumbai Alumni Association, to say a few words of welcome to Dr. Anish as well as our audience. Rekha?
Thank you, Aashay. Can you hear me? Yeah. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for coming here. And of course, big thank you to Dr. Anish Shah for being our guest today. We've really been wanting to have this event with him, not just because of all his accomplishments and, there's so much to learn from him, but also because he's a CMU alum. As many of you would be knowing, he's done his PhD from the Tepper School of Business, and I think that's makes all of us proud to see, where he's reached today. All of us from the CMU family. So thank you so much for being here and for, giving us this venue and helping us to have this event.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And I'd really like to now just hand it over to Aashay. I'm sure all of you will enjoy the evening, and it's really nice to, start having these in-person events now after such a long break. It's been our first, in-person event with a guest, a speaker event after 3 years. So that's another reason why today is special. So without any, taking up too much time, I'll hand it over to Aashay. Thanks. And of course, a big thank you to Aashay also for really putting in so much effort into not just this event, but into each and every other event which he has been, hosting. I think many of you would have seen him online. We've been doing a lot of events throughout the entire pandemic, and big thank you, Aashay, for your constant, enthusiasm. Thank you.
Thank you, Rekha. And thank you, Dr. Anish. Before I introduce Dr. Anish, to give you perspective, today I came in my Kia Seltos only because when we tried to book the Mahindra XUV, there was an 18-month waiting period. The new Scorpio sold 1 lakh units in 30 minutes, I believe. So that is testament to not only Dr. Anish Shah's leadership, but also to Mahindra's brand equity who's been building the country since 1945 before independence. Dr. Anish doesn't need any introduction. As Rekha mentioned, he's a proud Carnegie Mellon alum. Prior to Mahindra, he ran GE Capital in India, where he turned around the SBI card unit venture. Prior to that, he was at Bank of America. He's worked abroad and in India. And so it's been a fantastic career. He joined Mahindra in 2014 as a group president for strategy, then moved up to CFO in 2019, and now in 2021 took over Dr. Anand Mahindra's role and became the first non-family professional to take over Mahindra all group operation globally. That's 2.5 lakh employees, over 100 countries. So join me in welcoming Dr. Anish Shah. Welcome. Please say a few words of welcome to our audience, and thank you for having us.
So thanks, Aashay, for the very warm welcome. I will actually start with a request, which is Dr. Anish is not required. Just Anish is perfectly fine. And it's great to be here with everyone. Carnegie Mellon has always had a very special place in my heart. And it's great to be here in an event which is live. We've been talking about this for a while with Rekha, and my request there also was, let's do it when we can do it in person rather than on Zoom. It's always much better, and there's a lot more interaction. So we can keep this an interactive event as well. I know Aashay has a long list of questions, but feel free to jump in anytime you want, and we can just have an open discussion.
Awesome, thank you. So the format will be that it will be around 40-45 minutes of the Q&A and interview, and then we'll push it to the audience for Q&A. We will pass on mics. Don't worry, we won't call on specific people, but whoever's in the front seats, you probably have to ask a question.
Yeah. Maybe we call on the backbenchers.
Yeah, the back seats got filled up first. So, so we can get started. So Anish, not Dr. Anish. Anish, you're the first, as we mentioned, non-family professional to take over Mahindra, group operations all over the world. What was the transition like, especially during COVID, taking over from Dr. Mahindra as well as Mr. Goenka? What has been the transition experience been like?
Let me start with the timing of the transition. This was announced in December 2019. And the first phase of the transition was me taking over as Group CFO and Deputy MD. And that was going to start 2nd of April 2020. And then the second phase was taking over as MD, which is 2nd of April 2021. Um, and as we had it, COVID came in right around mid-March. Um, and our stock price had fallen to a low of 241. We had lost about 70% of value. And that was the starting point of the journey.
Wow.
So it helped in many ways to create a strong rallying cry and a platform to take quick actions on. We knew what actions had to be taken. Having been here for a while, that blueprint had been laid out. So therefore, it was much easier to do. And literally in about 3 months, we ended up selling, exiting, shutting down a bunch of businesses. And that really got us on a very good trajectory. And that momentum then helped take it forward. Working from home obviously had its own challenges. But as I look back at the last 4 months, in many ways it was a blessing in disguise. Because you could actually focus on things that you needed to focus on.
Absolutely.
And there was no travel, there were no visitors, nothing. And that helped get the important things done. And then a year later, as I formally took over as MD, I remember presenting to the board my 90-day plan. And I told them, I've looked at various 90-day plans from multiple leaders, from books, from what's on the web, from talking to people. And all of them had a set of things which was common. One was understanding the business. Second was understanding the financials. Third was outlining a plan to take tough actions. And fourth was taking tough actions. And I said, well, all of that has been done already. So now the question is, what else comes in the 90-day plan?
Right.
So it was, in a way, a good way to start formally in that role. And I would say a lot of credit to the team at Mahindra. It's just a fantastic set of leaders. And that really helped make it very smooth.
Absolutely. And I think what you mentioned about stock price falling 70%, that's a staggering challenge. But that's been a hallmark of your career. Turnarounds have been a hallmark of your career. And so in multiple interviews, you've mentioned about reigniting value at Mahindra. So what are your main focus areas? You said you've taken tough decisions to shut down some businesses. So what are your focus areas in terms of industries as Mahindra is concerned? And what are you focusing on turning around or focusing on?
So for us, the turnaround is complete. What we started with and what we promised to our investors was we'd first take care of all the loss-making businesses. In fiscal 19 and fiscal 20, we had loss-making businesses that contributed roughly about 3,500 to 4,000 crores of losses. So everything else that was done was really taken away by these businesses. And that was there for the first step. And we had promised that by fiscal 22, we'd come down to 300 crores of losses from 3,500 crores. That has been achieved. We came down to 191, and we're on a path to break even for loss-making businesses. The second thing we had promised was we'd get to 18% ROE in 3 to 5 years. And in 3 to 5 quarters, we actually got there. So for the last 4 quarters, we've been at 18% ROE. And therefore, the focus now is on scaling up businesses. It's all about growth. It's how do we go to becoming much bigger in every place we play in. So we're not looking at new sectors. My favorite answer, which I use very often for lots of ideas that come up on new sectors, is no. As simple as that.
Yep.
So it's a very quick answer. The reason for that is we are in lots of businesses today. And we've got to first really look at our businesses and scale those up. If something really compelling comes across, we'll look at it. But before that, we have very good businesses in multiple sectors. And the question is, why aren't we big enough?
Right.
And therefore, we want to grow those businesses first. After we do that, we'll look at further sectors after that.
Right. And I think it's in the heart of a CFO to say no. So I think that approach is unique. And you mentioned that farm, auto, Tech Mahindra and financial services are your core focus, and Mahindra is the largest tractor manufacturer in the world. So anything in particular in any of these sectors you want to highlight? I know you made a recent EV fundraise from the UK for $250 million. So anything in particular you want to highlight in these sectors?
So I can share a few headlines for each sector, but before I do that, I do want to comment on the CFO part. I've been a CFO only once in my life. Right. And I got that role as CFO of M&M. So I got into that role again, as I said, at the heart of COVID, and wondering, what does a CFO do? So that was the starting point. But as we think about our sectors, auto is all about momentum with regard to new vehicles and then with regard to EV. So it's a combination of both. It's not just EV. I think what we've done in terms of the last 5 launches has really helped the business get on a very strong track. Farm is about global dominance. We are the largest in terms of number of tractors we make, not in terms of value. But we play in a few countries around the world and on a smaller scale. So US, Brazil, Turkey, we want to play in a much bigger way and then export around to other parts of the world. Tech Mahindra is more about margins right now. Good business, lower margins than its peers. That's something that we need to fix. Mahindra Finance is about creating more value for shareholders, which is something we haven't done very well. Very good business, very strong business model, but it's on a very good path right now for transformation. Number of actions on that front. And then we've got what we call growth gems. These are businesses that have the potential to hit $1 billion of market cap in the next 2 to 4 years. The definition started with 3 to 5, that was a year ago, so we've taken a year out from there. And it's a very simple definition in a sense for all other businesses in the group that are not loss-making. So what we tell all our businesses is, you will get attention if you're a growth gem or if you're loss-making. If you're loss-making, you don't want that attention. And if you're anything in between which you make profits but you don't have a clear path to $1 billion of market cap, then you have a little bit of time to develop that plan. But till you develop that, you're not getting any attention. So we're really pushing all the businesses to start thinking big, to start scaling up.
Okay, got it. And I think those the points that you highlighted, a very clear, crisp plan. And you spoke in your previous answer on making tough decisions. And one of the leadership mantras you've quoted now, given that the topic is lessons in leadership, is that you have to give up control to gain control. So you took over during COVID, inflation, war. So how did you, in terms of, what are the leadership lessons you want to highlight in terms of, taking tough decisions, but also bringing along a workforce of over 2 lakh people on board to your new strategies?
So that is a very interesting thing that you picked up, Aashay, from one of my interviews. And let me spend a little bit of time on that, because it took me many years to even understand what that meant. An ex-boss of mine had said this maybe about 20 years ago or somewhere in that time frame. And I really didn't understand what it is. I mean, if you want control, you need to take control, but how do you give it up and get control in the first place? And I finally understood that meaning not from business, but from my kids. Because with my older son, I tried to give all the boundaries that I tried to put for him didn't work at all. I mean, he was, exactly like what I was probably in my youth, rebelling on every single boundary that was there. So there was this constant battle on, why is this in place? Why do I need to do this? Why do you tell me this? And the more I tried to control, the more I lost control.
Right.
And I finally learned, after many painful discussions, that, look, you have the freedom to do it, right? Let me explain some of the whys to you, and you make your own decisions after that. And frankly, that got a lot better. And a lot of decisions were made as I look at them and say, okay, that makes a lot of sense, right? But if I told you do it this way, you probably wouldn't have. So that helped a lot from a work standpoint after that as well. Right. And as I look at our teams and working with peers as well, before I got into this role, a lot of it is about the trust that you develop. It's about helping others. It's about empowering them. And in many ways, it's tougher to do because you want control on everything that's happening around you. But if you're open to saying, it's okay, I'm not going to control these things. And in reality, you actually don't control lots of things. There are lots of things that just happen. So it's the willingness to accept that fact and say, yeah, I'll deal with them as they happen, but let's have the team together deal with it as well. So that's really the background to that and sort of how we worked through that.
And through that transition, was it, I mean, again, I'm just looking at the size of the organization, having over 2 lakh employees. How do you scale? My always question is, how do you scale that culture? So it's come from the top where you've given up control to gain control. How do you think about leadership in scaling that culture across not only India, but across the world in terms of the operations?
Now, some aspects of that culture were already in place because what I've seen since I've joined here and things I've admired about the Mahindra culture are really the empowerment. And that's something that Anand had been doing for many, many years. The transparency, the ability to speak up, to speak your mind, saying, here's what I'd suggest. I had come from a culture which was like that in many ways. And coming to an Indian group, I wasn't sure whether it would be different or not.
Right.
So I, in fact, did take a little bit of time before I finally came on board. But as I came on board, I worked exactly the same way as I worked in GE prior to that, absolutely no difference. It was perfectly fine to speak your mind in terms of whatever you thought without worrying about this person wants to hear this or this person wants to hear that. Right. And there was full freedom in terms of what you wanted to do. So there were lots of elements of that culture already in place. What wasn't in place was that it hadn't percolated to all the businesses at all levels.
Sure.
And we would often joke that we were a federation of conglomerates, where the federation at the senior level had the empowerment, but once you got into a company, it was a conglomerate and there was no empowerment down the line. So that was the one main thing that we wanted to do, is take this culture across everywhere. And what we did as part of that was defined what we called as Mahindra Behaviors. And that started with ethics and collaboration, agility and boldness. And that's what we encourage all our associates to follow. And we measure them on that. Our reviews, our performance reviews are done on these metrics as well. And we in fact give everyone feedback on how they are on each of these 4 items.
Okay. That's I think what unique, what you highlighted was Mr. Anand Mahindra, already putting the empowerment in place, and that not all family-run businesses have that when you have a non-family professional take over. So would you want to highlight something about that transition, like, given a free hand by the owner and operators? I think that's unique, very unique, especially in Indian culture where there's more control from the top.
That is absolutely very unique, right?
Yeah.
And even though I'd seen a lot of empowerment even prior to the transition, what made the transition very smooth was Anand basically stepping back and saying, it's your decision. Right. On a number of exits in particular, because these were not easy decisions. And a number of other leaders were obviously very emotionally invested in many of these things as well. And that's a message that Anand would give the other leaders as well, saying that it's not our decision anymore. This is a decision that the new team has to take, and let them decide what they want to do and let them go ahead with it.
Right.
And obviously I would ask him before all of these difficult decisions, what's your guidance? He always had some very good guidance to offer. And often I'd ask him, any other things that we need to consider, and are you generally fine with it? And his response always was, your job is to create value. You create value. Okay. The more value you create, the happier we are going to be as shareholders, and therefore you focus on doing what you want to do. And that is very unusual, I would say.
Absolutely. Absolute free hand, and that is super unusual. And I think what you spoke about, the transition angle from, company transitioning, the employees transitioning, there were lessons through that which has been guided from the top. But what's unique about your experience is that you worked in the US for a long time. You got your master's, PhD, you worked at Bank of America, and then you moved to India in a corporate world. So what were your biggest learnings in that transition? I'm sure there were a lot. What are the biggest surprises? What are the biggest shockers? And, pearls of wisdom here.
So it was an easier transition because I came back with the company that I had worked with in the US for 9 years. And therefore, it was much easier coming back with the same company. You didn't have to adapt to the culture here in many ways.
Sure.
And what I found was it was dramatically different. And I'll give specific examples. And this is the same company. So my approach is generally very open, very transparent, call a spade, and have a discussion on any topic, doesn't matter how difficult it is. And I came in and did exactly that, and similarly reported up to our bosses outside India, saying, here's the state of affairs, this is what we're good at, this is what we really suck at, and this is what we need to do to get better. And in about 2 or 3 weeks, my team sort of sat down and said, we want to talk to you. And they literally told me, like, you're being too open. Why are you sharing all these things? Now, incidentally, after my first week, I'd gone to Tokyo, which is where my boss was head of GE Capital Asia, John Flannery, who eventually took over as GE's overall head. And he told me, he said, we don't know what to trust because the information we get coming out of India, we don't know whether to believe that or not.
Right.
So I had 2 different views. Right? And the team was literally uncomfortable with that level of openness and transparency. So that was one element of culture change. The second element of culture change was this word called batch.
Batch?
Batch.
Batch.
Right? That so-and-so is in this batch, this is their batchmate. If we promote this person, that other person gets upset. And therefore, it has to be linked to this overall ecosystem of which batch have you graduated from, and some decisions have to be considered based on that, right? Which was a very foreign concept to me because I had grown up in a G which was a pure meritocracy.
Right.
You did what you had to do, and if you did well, you went ahead. No one ever talked about parity with anyone else in your batch, etc. Now, I don't know whether that was a unique thing within GE Capital India, whether that happens more across. I have heard some of that here as well, but there usually is a fair degree of emotion attached to that. And had to do a lot of effort actually trying to get people over that fact that, let's do a pure meritocracy. Don't worry about age of the person. Don't look at, but they aren't old enough to be in this role. Like, what do you mean they're not old enough to be in this role? Right? If they've done a good job, if they're ready for the role, then they should be in that role.
Absolutely.
Right? How does age have anything to do with it? And that, in fact, forced me to look back at my career and experience. And I was in North Carolina with a GE business on the leadership team there at the age of 29 for a business that made $550 million of net income.
Wow.
And everyone else on that team was 12 to 15 years older than I was. In southern US, where typically it's white male. When I was there, I never felt it at all. I never even thought about it. Right. After coming to India and hearing about this, I looked back at it and I said, how did that happen? So that's one difference again. There is a fair degree of hierarchy that's often here. So those were the 2 major things to adjust to. The third one was something that I didn't have to adjust to as much. Maybe I did eventually adjust, but others around me had to adjust to, which is giving direct feedback. Right? I had, in many ways, been very fortunate, and I use the word fortunate very positively here because some people may not think it's fortunate, to get very direct feedback in my early career. Right? And people were very open in telling me, you're really bad at this, you suck at this, you add no value here. Right? And that has helped me a lot through my career. I tried doing that same thing after I came here. Just backfired.
The emotions come in.
It just backfired. Right? So I had to find ways to sort of dial back on that a little bit. I think these were the 3 main things that I had to do in terms of transition.
And what were the, the pleasant experiences that you found moving countries and moving cultures when you moved into India? So it's like surprisingly pleasant.
For me, it was great being back in India. My wife and I always wanted to come back. And the initial goal was spend 7 years in the US, ideally 4 years studying, 3 years with a job, and then come back to India. And that got elongated a bit. We actually did come back for 2 years when I was still in a global role, but I figured let me just stay here and do the global role, and that will help me understand India better, possibly look at opportunities here.
Sure.
But the litmus test always was, where is the role better, where is the opportunity better?
Right.
And if it were better in the US, I'd go back, and actually I did go back from India to the US, had given up hopes of coming back, and then got a call from a friend saying, your dream job's open, do you want it? I said, fine, I'm coming, and that's how I came back. So being in India was a big plus in itself.
Absolutely.
And to me, there were a lot of other positives. I mean, there are lots of great things with regard to the culture here as well, while you talk about some of the other things which were different. Just the passion of the folks, the involvement, the friendliness, there's a lot closer connection than you see outside India, where it does tend to be a little more transactional.
Absolutely.
Here it's not as transactional, it's a little more of a family at work. And those are the big pluses.
Absolutely. And I asked this question because I personally moved back after 10 years in 2019. I finished my MBA in 2019, moved back. And I know there's a lot of people who've moved back or are thinking of moving back and on the live stream as well. So that's the reason I ask questions regarding this. So what would be your advice, not only to young students or young professionals who are thinking of making this transition back to India? Because right now, you see where, in the government priorities, you see where digital India is moving, our workforce, our literacy rates, all the indicators are pointing forward. So what would be your advice to people thinking of moving back and making that transition? What to look out for, and what are your views on that?
So I would say the earlier the better. Right? I literally got very lucky because the longer you wait, there are fewer and fewer roles available here. And even when I came in with GE Capital, as I said, I'd given up, and someone called and said, here's a role that's just opened up, and I could come in here. And then even after I came in here with GE Capital, the real choice was to stay in India with a different role or to go back to the US, because a multinational has a small business in India. You really can't, if you want a strong career path, you can't stay in India. And it was very apparent. And after 3 years, I knew that it was time to go back.
Absolutely.
And I said, okay, let me spend a couple of years more and then I'll go back. And in those couple of years, I started talking with Anand and looking at the Mahindra group. But I had narrowed it down to 2 companies in India that I'd work for, based on what I saw of culture and everything else. Right? Because at that point in time, you reached a certain level where you got very few potential roles and potential companies. And one of them worked. Right? But that doesn't always happen.
Right.
So the guidance I'd have is, if you do want to come back to India, come back earlier. That way you get integrated into the culture here. There are a lot of opportunities that are in India now. You might have to give up a little bit because early in the career, there are always greater opportunities in the US. But the career path here is longer and better, I feel.
Absolutely. I think one concern that I had particularly, when you work in a professional environment in the US, and then you come to ground level businesses in India, whether it's a family business, it's what you said, the filtered information, you really have to be active on the ground. So I know in your career span, you've been very ingrained into the ground level operations. And is that something that is to be inculcated? How do you train someone to be involved on the ground level and not just stay at the top getting information and making decisions?
I've always felt that to be a good leader, you have to understand the business in and out, whatever you're doing, even with empowerment. And usually every role that I get into the first 6 months, I don't empower a whole lot. I learn. And that is important. And then after that, as you get comfortable with each area, you start actively giving up control, actively letting people go off and do what they want to. At the same time, what I tell folks is, as we look at overall reviews, if there are areas that sound weak, where there are 2 or 3 questions that are not answered well, then there's a deep dive. And that deep dive is usually a very painful affair.
Right.
So if businesses have their act together, then they're left alone. They move forward. If there's something that's missing, then you have to get into details. So you have to have the ability to go very deep and the ability to stay at 30,000 foot. I think the important thing is knowing when to be where.
Right. And I think the one thing I picked up, you said, was for the first 6 months, you're just observing and not learning. But the general human tendency is to start making changes as soon as you get into, maybe show that you're doing work or that you're making a difference. But I think that's
Sometimes I've done that as well.
sometimes that's needed. But hearing you talk, your depth of knowledge of the company and your vision for the company, you laid out your 90-day plans. So what are you most excited about Mahindra Group for the next 5 years? Like, what are you most excited about? And what are you most worried about? And not only Mahindra Group, but also India as a country.
So what I'm most excited about is that we are positioned really well.
Yeah.
And this is not just in terms of our businesses and how they do, but also in terms of who we are. To me, that's the biggest plus that I see in the Mahindra Group. So our firm belief is that purpose will drive profits. So it starts with purpose.
Yep.
So if I think about what we're delivering in the next 5 years, it's purpose, profits, and being future ready. Those are the 3 areas that we're delivering on. And the philosophy of the group has been purpose first, which I think is the best part.
Absolutely. And in terms of the India story, what are you most excited about, macroeconomically or, where we stand in the world?
So let me share an experience from about 3 or 4 months ago. At Davos, there is a smaller group called the International Business Council.
Right.
This is a group of about 100 to 120 CEOs of the top companies around the world. And they usually spend about 4 or 5 hours together every time folks are in Davos. Yep. And in that session this year, we had that group divided in 10 different tables. And each table was given a list of 5 questions. And they were told, pick any of the 5 questions you want, and then report out on the discussion you had at the table.
Okay.
8 of the 10 tables picked the same question. And that question was, what is the lesson from sanctions on Ukraine?
Okay.
And all 8 talked about the lesson being, what happens if there are sanctions on China?
Right.
At my table, one of the leaders who leads a reasonably large global business said that for the last 6 years, his objective was, as he defined it, ABC, anywhere but China.
Interesting.
And he said it's been 6 years and we still haven't gotten out completely.
Correct.
Because it takes time. But that's on the mind of all the global leaders saying, how do we de-risk? The next question that came up as part of the discussion was, where is anywhere?
Right.
And anywhere is Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, but they're all small. Right? And then the question came on, what about India? Right? And someone actually made a comment that, look, we have to learn to be patient with India. So people are starting to have an open mind about being patient with India, but the biggest question they have in their minds is it easy to do business here or not?
Correct.
But herein is the opportunity for us. People are looking at ABC. But that ABC has to be converted as, from China to India, not anywhere but China.
Right.
So therefore, I do feel that India is extremely well positioned. I also believe that the government actually recognizes this and is doing a fantastic job right now to find ways to make things easier. And in various conversations that I've had with the government, and again, I'll give an example here, again, from Davos.
Sure.
We had Piyush Goyal there, and he said, look, every night at 10 o'clock, I want all the key CEOs to come and have a session to talk about what happened today, what were the messages out there, what should we change, what are we hearing, what should we be responding, right? I've been to Davos a few times before, I've never seen this happen.
Right.
And we literally met at 10 p.m. at the end of a long day to just go through what were the key messages that we wanted to deliver the next day. That's one example, but there are many others where they're looking at ways to bring foreign investments in. Yes, there is more work to be done. I don't say that we are where we need to be right now. We're still far away from where we need to be. But that momentum is clear. Absolutely. So it is India's opportunity to grab. This is the time right now. And there's a lot more that we can do as a country.
Absolutely. And your comment on patience, reminded me of a quote when someone said, India is unique because it disappoints both the optimists and the pessimists. So, we're on that trajectory. So this is a great segue into, in terms of policy level. So what would be on your policy bucket wish list if you were given that option to, voice it out from the Indian government or from the industry sector that, you would think really bolsters manufacturing, really bolsters innovation, and, creates jobs at the end of the day?
I would just say easier to do business. I think everything else is in place right now.
Yeah.
There are incentives for manufacturing. There are ways to attract investment into India. All of that is being done very well.
Yeah.
It's just working on various things, and that complexity also comes in because of the federal versus the state structure.
Sure.
A lot of complexity lies in the states. So it's not easy to say, we change this and it changes overnight. You need everyone to work together in making that happen.
Absolutely. And I think slowly and surely we are moving towards that. And, with leaders like yourself, pushing India's name, not only through India, but globally, I think we will get there one day. Today's audience is obviously very eclectic. We have 50% CMU alums, but also 50% non-CMU. So thanks everyone for coming. But there will obviously be a question on Carnegie Mellon. So, so given that Dr. Anish did his master's as well as PhD at Carnegie Mellon. So what would you say were one of your fondest memories of the school? How did it empower you, train you to be where you are today? And, would love some feedback on your experiences and your outlook towards the school.
So one of my early experiences was at, I was told that you should go off and do various other things outside your department. Because even though a PhD usually is supposed to be sort of 1 inch wide and 1 mile deep, the approach that taken was you got to get broader experiences, go out and take classes in various different areas.
Absolutely.
Some of it I loved. I went and took a class in German, not that I know much of it now. And I took classes in various other places. And then I wandered into this one class which was on real math, which was actually closer to actually doing a PhD because you needed to use real math for all the theoretical stuff that you had to do for the PhD.
Yep.
This was a freshman class. And I figured, look, I've got my MBA, I've worked after that. How difficult can a freshman class be? And therein lay the mistake. I thankfully was auditing the class, but I probably understood about 2% of what went on there. The remaining 90% was way up in the air somewhere. Right? So what I learned there was, look, I need to be very clear of what I don't know or what I never will know. And then the question is, how do I get around it? Because a PhD typically has one of three things, or two of three things: a theoretical set, an empirical set, or an experimental set.
Right.
So you need to have those two of those three. So I said, fine, maybe I can do empirical and experimental. I can leave theoretical aside completely. But then you have to go through qualifying exams. And qualifying exams will have theory. So I said, now that's a tough part. How do I get past that? There, I did get lucky to a large extent. There were two papers that had a very high degree of theory. In one paper, the professor said, you can take it home, you have 24 hours, and you can come back in 24 hours. I didn't sleep for those 24 hours, but I got something back that got me through that paper at least. The second paper, I was convinced that even if that professor gave me 48 hours or 72 hours, there's no way I was going to be able to answer that. Thankfully, that the professor said, this is a pretty tough area. Go in groups of 4 and come back with your answer in groups of 4. Therein come the management skills. So we had a Stanford graduate in that group of 4. We had a Berkeley graduate. And we had someone from Eastern Europe who was a math wizard. Right? And I was the fourth one in there. Right? What I could provide to that group was intuition. So as that problem was, I said, look, I think the answer is somewhat like that. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me how to get there. Now, thankfully, that intuition was right. They found a way to get there. I had my contribution, and I got through my qualifying exams.
Awesome. So CMU is better than Stanford and Berkeley then. I don't think we have any alums.
We were all at CMU, so from that standpoint, it worked well. But it was a great experience. There were lots of things, and it was the ability to go out and do various different things that you wanted to. My thesis was finally based on a game, which I think was unique to. There were a lot of things unique in terms of my journey at Carnegie Mellon. I'm probably the only person who's done a PhD at Carnegie Mellon with Excel. I don't think anyone's replicated that. And I had to actually get 3 Excel files, link them together because I'd used all the space in an Excel file, which at one point I thought was very difficult to do, but I could still end up doing that. But typically you need to know a statistical program to do it. And I just found Excel much easier and therefore did it on Excel. Second was I completed my PhD there in 2 years and 9 months.
Wow.
And I don't think that's a record that's been broken since then. All credit to my advisor. 99% credit goes there, 1% goes to me. And it was done based on a game. And that game was a stock exchange game that I'd learned in Mumbai in the time I didn't spend in class in Mumbai. That game was converted to a network lab environment in the early to mid-90s, where we had students play the role of CEOs and stock market traders. And that became a class there, initially for undergrad and then for MBA as well. And students loved it because grades were based on how much money you made, and you're talking about how you did it. Right? It was for dividend policies, capital structure, all of those theories. So
right.
You had to weave that in. So you did the reading at home, but then you came back in class and talked about it. But no exams. It was just play the game, make money, and talk about these theories. So that was the basis for the research that took place. That was the basis for my advisor actually coming in and being interested and helping me through. So fantastic time.
Absolutely. And one lesser known fact, or maybe most of you know, that Anish's wife Snehal also went to Carnegie Mellon, also has a PhD from there. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it. But before we break into Q&A, I wanted to ask you on that personal angle, given you've said you moved across the world multiple times, from India abroad back. Obviously, your wife has been with you throughout. So wanted to share a few words on that experience of having a spouse through this journey, through Carnegie Mellon's PhD. How was that experience, and what did you learn from that?
So all I've learned on that is my wife has been amazingly supportive through that entire journey. And as I look back on it, let me just recount that journey for you. So we got married and moved to Pittsburgh. And then as she started her PhD, by the time she finished her first year, I'd graduated already, so I'd moved to Boston. So we sort of commuted for a couple of years. Then from Boston, we moved to North Carolina in Raleigh. From Raleigh, we moved to Stamford, Connecticut. From Stamford, we moved to Mumbai. From Mumbai, we moved to Charlotte, North Carolina. From Charlotte, we moved to Gurgaon. And then from Gurgaon, we came to Mumbai. Right? So that shows you the amount of support that she's given. And she had done a PhD as well. She had an offer from Duke to teach there. She taught at NC State before that for a little while. And then whenever she got comfortable in a place, I said, we're moving now. So that made it very difficult for her. So she's been absolutely great through the journey.
Awesome. Awesome to hear. And, on that note, on that personal note, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions because there's been so much that we've talked about. So we will open it up to the audience for Q&A. So there will be mics that will be passed around by the team. So when you ask your question, please introduce yourself, your network, or where you work, and then please ask your question to Anish. So we'll go. Okay, first question.
Good evening, Doctor. I'm Nidhi Kanoi from Millennium Mams. Considering the disruption in the auto industry, especially with regards to EV, how do you see Mahindra Group and yourself as a disruptor, or would you be disrupted?
So let me talk a little about our EV journey. We bought an EV company in 2008. And for many years, were the only manufacturer of electric vehicles in India, and in fact, the largest in the world for some of that time as well. And then at some point, we felt that we could do everything in-house because we know EV very well. And we sort of lost our way in that. quickly course corrected, and just recently, in fact, just about 10 days ago, we've revealed our EV approach, which is launching 5 electric SUVs. Typically, an auto company talks about 1 vehicle or 2 vehicles they're launching. In this case, it's literally 5 electric SUVs that will be launched within a span of about 12 to 18 months. And that will give us leadership back in EV in a very significant way, because this is on a born electric platform. And it has technology that even Volkswagen has acknowledged is outstanding technology, because we had started with their platform first, and as we built our own platform, they may want to use it in some areas as well. So we are still leveraging their expertise in batteries and motors, and hopefully building a much stronger partnership there. But we feel that we have done a lot today with developing that platform with the cars that are ready to be launched now. And that should position us extremely well.
Right. And in terms, just to jump on that, there's been, I think today's EV penetration in India is 1% of 3 million vehicles that are sold in India. And one of your interviews, you said by 2030 or 2040, you believe 50% of new production vehicles will be EV. So we're on track for that, and you see that happening?
So in terms of milestones, by 27, we are expecting 20 to 30% of our production at least to be EVs.
Okay.
A lot will depend after that on infrastructure. And the key point in infrastructure is going to be the charging time. If charging time stays at 30 to 45 minutes, it's going to be very difficult to put up infrastructure. Sure. You can't use up real estate in Mumbai to charge a car for 30 to 45 minutes on the streets. But if that comes down to 5 to 10 minutes, that starts taking off.
Right.
So if you've got reasonable infrastructure, I feel you could reach 50% by 2030. It may take a little longer if infrastructure takes longer.
Thank you. Next question. I think there was a question here, and then we'll move back. I think Akash had a question. Or Ronak first, and then we can go to Akash.
Hi, my name is Ronak, and I run a company called Aim Higher in tech recruitment. I had 2 questions for you. You mentioned that giving feedback in India was difficult. You had to change your approach, and you had to reel back on the sort of frankness that you used to use. So how did you change it, and was that change as effective in getting the message through? And the second question I had was around autonomous vehicles. Do you see a future for autonomous vehicles in India, and how do you see it competing with the rest of the world and changing the way businesses run in general?
So on feedback, there were 2 points. One is giving sharper feedback to folks who had a lot more ambition. So assessing first, or even asking directly, what is your ambition, right? And telling them that, look, the more ambitious you are, the harsher I'm going to be in terms of feedback, because that's going to help you. So setting that expectation right up front. Because you're not going to get too far in your career unless you can take feedback and act on it. And then for folks who are not as ambitious, they are equally good overall. But I have always believed that each person has to make their own choice about how far they want to go, because it's a balance. And each person can drive their own balance. And there are some very good people who may not want to go too far. So why worry about giving them very sharp feedback in that sense? So one, it's understanding that difference. And second is being pinpointed on focusing on just maybe one item for that year. And say, just focus on this right now. We'll talk about something else next year. Rather than giving them 3 or 4 things and having them feel that, oh, I've just got the whole sky falling on my head. And that's helped overall. Okay. Second, on autonomous, having driven on Mumbai streets, it's going to take a while. So our approach is let it be perfected outside India. It will probably come here 10 years after that.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi Anish, Akash here. I come from real estate space. So pardon if my question is a little off from your experience, but I'll anyway shoot it up. So 2 questions, quick one. One is, real estate comes with its own set of challenges. Mahindra got into the business and slowly scaling it up. How does it fit into the conglomerate culture?
So in terms of culture, and that's a great question, I'll take that directly. You're right, it has its own challenges. And in fact, this has been one of my learnings coming in as well as to how this culture is nurtured going forward. In one of the first reviews that I sat in, after I joined in 2014 for our real estate company, Anand specifically made a comment to the CEO at that point saying, look, I'm not going to push you on numbers because I don't want you doing something that doesn't fit our culture. Right? Because something had taken 2 years to get approvals on, and it was because we were not willing to make a payment to get approval in 2 weeks or 2 months, whatever the time may have been. And the expectation was very clear. The first thing is we should sleep easy at night. Right? That is the number one expectation. So maintain the culture, do the right thing. The next thing is numbers, right? Which again comes back to purpose comes first. If purpose is good, profits will follow.
Quick one, sorry guys. Which category does it come into? $1 billion one or the baby that doesn't get attention?
So it was about 500 million or a little less, maybe 400 million of market cap about 12 to 18 months ago. And this was a message given to all the businesses. It touched $1 billion of market cap briefly 2 days ago. And today it's at somewhere around 980 or 990 million or something of that sort. So it's almost there.
The questions at the back. I saw those hands raised first at the back.
Good evening, Doctor. This is Shireen Talreja from Millennium MAMS. My question, sir, is your company is in so many diversified businesses. Is there any plan to unlock value through a demerger anytime?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'll expand on that. I'll tell you why. Right? There are lots of synergies, and this is a question we get often because the sum of parts actually doesn't give us the full value. There's a conglomerate discount that's applied. So it's a very valid question, and it's something I get from investors on a very regular basis. If you look at Escorts as a standalone tractor company and look at their PE multiple, apply that PE multiple to our tractor business, and apply our auto multiples separately, and if you take the recent valuation we got on EV of $9 billion and put all of it together, we should probably be worth twice of what we are right now. Right? Maybe that's an exaggeration, but maybe a little less than that. But what I tell investors is there's a lot of noise in there around things that haven't worked very well also. And we're taking all that noise out first. So all the loss-making businesses will come out first. There'll be other things that may not add as much value. They will come out. And let us do that first. Once we've done that, then we have a better sense of what is the real value of the core businesses. Because today we get almost no value for the unlisted entities. And some of them actually have a tremendous amount of value. The second part is to look at what are the synergies. If you have auto and farm together, the purchasing power is significantly higher than either auto or farm. What's proof of that? Today, our margins in the farm business are far higher than anyone in the industry. Not even close. Our margins in the auto business are also higher than the industry. In farm, it's not a surprise. If you have a 40% market share, you'd better have higher margins. Right? In auto, we don't have a 40% market share. We've got a much lower market share than few of our big competitors, but we have higher margins than them. Right? Why is that the case? Because of some of the synergies and the buying power that comes with it. Right? So what we've told investors is we'll come back and we'll show this once we've taken the noise out of the system, that here's a potential value creation and the benefit of keeping it together. So the short-term answer is, yes, if you do this, you get a bump in your stock price, but for us, we're looking more at the long-term answer of really creating value.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions at the back?
Hello, my name is Gunjan. I work at NVIDIA for Autonomous Vehicle Department. Okay. My question is on similar lines to the previous one. Why is it peculiar in India that big conglomerates are into so many businesses, but then when you compare it with where we have been, US, like there are focused companies like spending their entire generations on a single product or similar products. If you take example of Steve Jobs, he came back, he delisted so many products and only focused on one, and those have grown into trillion-dollar companies. But Indian conglomerates are like so diversified. Is it a cultural difference or is it something else?
So let me go back in time for that. If you go back to pre-91, before liberalization, India was really driven by a license Raj. The conglomerate allowed you to get licenses. If you were smaller, you didn't have the clout. And therefore, it was easier for a conglomerate to say, I want a license in this area, or even easier from an operations standpoint. Okay. The question is what happens after that? We are post 91 YFR margin now. There's an element of trust. And that takes time to develop. With more information easily available in India, that could work faster, and which is why today conglomerates cannot exist just because I'm a conglomerate. People are not going to buy just because we are Mahindra. They're going to buy because our product is better than someone else's product. Or our service is better than someone else's product, service, or a combination of all of those things. So the element that applies is the ability to have trust and something that the brand stands for. Because service levels in India today, or even levels of companies being authentic to customers to say, I will give you what I promise, aren't as good as they are in the US, as an example. If you look at most industries, service levels in India are not very good today. Right? Therein lies the opportunity for us, but therein also lies the reason for why conglomerates exist. Now, 5 or 10 years later, that's not going to be the case. And therefore, even as we think about ourselves, our small businesses don't need to be there. Right? Each business has to stand alone on its own, has to create scale on its own to be able to develop that value based on the product they have, based on the service they have. So we are moving to that space where you're going to have fewer conglomerates. The other thing unique here also is many entities or many groups have multiple listed entities, which is not the case in US conglomerates. It's typically one conglomerate with divisions. Here the listed entities have a fair degree of freedom. The way we operate our listed entities is through our independent boards. And they've got a fair degree of freedom in what they need to do. But they have an umbrella that gives them the brand and that gives them the trust factor. So that adds greater value.
Thanks, Anish. Great session. Raj Saxena from Logistics Now. We are a startup backed by Shell and last week by Flipkart. And strong interest in decarbonization and sustainability. Kept learning from you for a number of years from the group. And would love to hear your thoughts specifically on decarbonization of commercial transportation in India.
So if you look at commercial transportation specifically, that's going to take a little longer. And let me just take a step back first, talk about our journey. We started our sustainability journey in 2008, well before it became something very popular or something that was an urgent burning platform. And we've done a lot through that time frame. Our focus is on 3 areas. Greening ourselves, and we've done a lot on that, which is science-based targets, getting to renewable energy 100, getting to EP 100, all of those things. The second part is decarbonizing our industries, and the third is nurturing the planet. Won't go into more detail on that, but as I come specifically to commercial vehicles, the reason that's going to take longer is hydrogen technology hasn't come into India or even the world as much as yet. Passenger vehicles are going to get there faster. Even for passenger vehicles, decarbonization, if we look at it in that strict sense, requires more than EVs. One car, an average car with average usage, over its life, will typically generate about 35 tons of carbon. If we get to 100% EV, that 35 comes down to 27.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So not a big difference. Right? And therefore you say, what is all this fuss about EV? Right? If we're going to actually just reduce it by 20%. But that's because electricity generation today is based on fossil fuel. Right? If you get to renewable energy at 100%, that 27 goes to 7. Right? Then you start seeing a huge difference. And then you've got a bunch of things around buying green steel and buying various other components that are green, transportation, all of those things that come into play, that's the remaining 7. Apply the same thing for commercial vehicles. Right? It has to start with what is the source for the vehicle itself. Then what is that source? Is that a fossil fuel based source or is that a green source? It's possible technology go faster and overtake four-wheelers or passenger four-wheelers. But today it appears that passenger four-wheelers will come faster. Though what I will say is, there's another segment for commercial three-wheelers. And that's going to move to electric much faster. Because we have a business that has been doing ICE three-wheelers for a while, and we started electric a couple of years ago. Over the last year, we've gone from 25% electric to about 64% electric. So that shift has been very quick. Because you've got cost parity, infrastructure is not a problem, because in three-wheelers, you can just take the battery out and put the new one in, and battery swapping becomes very easy. And people are actually developing battery swapping solutions where you don't even need to buy the battery. Just come in on subscription, and you just get the battery based on your subscription. And you got good range as well. So on the commercial three-wheeler side, that will happen very fast. On the heavy commercial vehicles, at least right now, based on where the technology is, it will take a little longer.
Right. I think this nuance on EV and renewable energy is lost on many people, so thanks for that clarity. Two questions at the back, and I think in terms of time, we will do these two questions, and then, so at the back, please. Oh, sorry. One question here. Sorry, Yash.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Yash Bhansali. I'm coming in through the NYU Stern Network. Firstly, thanks a lot for doing the session. My question was, you spoke a bit about shutting down certain businesses that were loss-making or didn't make sense strategically. How do you find new opportunities? How do you keep your ear to the ground or listen to the pulse in the market, and then identify new opportunities that are worth pursuing, either for the short-term or long-term growth?
So that, yes, the first thing is mindset. Because it doesn't always have to be new opportunities. It's an existing business as well. What is the mindset? Are we thinking about growing 10% a year, 20% a year? Or are we going to forget percentages and say, how can we scale up 10x in 5 years? That, in most large businesses, is the first thing to address. Because in most large businesses, you say, I'm going to grow 20% a year, you're a hero. And how do you change that to say, look, we're not going to worry about 20% a year, we've really got to grow in a much bigger way. And therefore, today we're looking at opportunities within our businesses. For opportunities outside, simple criteria in terms of what is our right to win and what is our ability to execute. So why would someone buy that product from us if we were in that industry? And if we were there, do we have the way to execute it better than someone else, or at least at par with someone else to be able to get the returns we want? That's the screen we would use.
So just as a follow-up to that, being in a leadership position, how do you filter through the ideas that come through? How do you even listen to the ideas that are kind of circulating in the organization, and then decide which ones are worth pursuing?
So the first filter is the standard ones that you'd have. What is a capital investment? What's the payback period? What's the return? But the more important filter is trust in the leader. To say, if you have this idea, how confident are you that you can make it happen? Right? And there will be leaders that say that, look, here's the challenge I see. This is where I have confidence. This is where I don't have confidence. And if they're open about that and they know what are the blind spots, then in some ways it's easier to trust them than someone that comes in and says, yeah, I think I can do all of it. So these are the two factors. It's numbers and it's leadership.
Thanks.
Thank you. Just a quick time check. It's 8:30. How many? A couple of questions is okay?
Yeah. Let's take a couple. There was, I think, one question here as well. We can probably just try and cover the questions for folks who have their hands up right now.
Okay. So two on the back there.
Yeah, I think two on the back there, two here. There was one, and Krishma. Okay, or four questions.
Good evening, Anish. Thanks for sharing your insights. Someone who's worked on Wall Street and Silicon Valley before, back in India now. Great to hear your insights on how to navigate that. Probably not too popular, but good to see some NYU representation here as well. Love CMU. My key question around, continuing around the theme of sustainability and EVs perhaps. Mahindra has a huge presence in the sort of agri space as well. Have you focused on sort of the problem around sustainability of feeding 10 billion by 2050, huge part of it which will come from India? And I asked this because I head up a fund called Ahimsa VC. We're focused on investing in the future of food and sustainable consumption overall with materials as well. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So this is with regard to tractors in particular, is?
Not necessarily specifically focused on food, perhaps disrupting animal agriculture as a singular category that happens to be the largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and use of land and water around the world. So usually when people talk about sustainability, EVs are obviously a huge topic of conversation. But how we feed 10 billion people by 2050 and how there is a rise in meat consumption and primarily driven by India and China, that's a topic that usually doesn't get enough of a limelight, although numerically speaking, statistically speaking, that's one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change.
So we've done a lot of work on that in a category of what we call nurturing the planet. So one aspect is on water management, because in India that's a very important aspect. And we've done a lot of work on watersheds, which have helped sort of 20,000 farms or villages rather. We've done a lot of work on being water positive across our businesses, which has helped as well. But the bigger impact really has been on regenerative agriculture. And for that, we've had a team over the last 4 years or so that has been working with various farmers on putting in various techniques to improve productivity in their land. And typically farmers have told us, show us. So we've asked them give us 1 acre of your land, or more than 1 acre if you want to, and we'll actually show you that on that acre we can get better productivity than what you do elsewhere. And the usual set of techniques used around sensors, drones, whatever else that needs to be put in there. And we have today about 1,000 technique plots, as we call them. And that knowledge base is very strong because we found differences by each district, not even within each state. And we are now in the process of looking at should we have a startup that really takes this knowledge and starts becoming Mahindra agnostic and disseminating this information to all the farmers, which will start improving productivity on a much larger scale.
Hi, sir. Konark Bhandari, NYU again, 3 in a row. I wanted to touch on EVs again. Given the dynamic nature of the industry, how do you guys decide on the battery chemistries and the risks involved? And a little more upstream on what are the views on the risks associated with the EV metals supply chain? And since that's a big part of your business, how do you look at that?
Great questions. So on batteries, we actually take a group of our leaders to MIT every year. We spend a day there and we spend a few days sort of elsewhere in that area. And I've been going there for the past 8 years, except for the pandemic. Every year, there is this new thing in EV battery technology, and which is supposed to be the best and brightest innovation that's going to change battery technology forever. By the time we go there next year, that's gone and something else is coming. So that's the state of batteries right now. Today, we've gone from NMC or lithium, which is lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt, to LFP as being a better standard, which is lithium ferrous phosphate. And solid state is the next one that's likely to come in, but the cost of solid state today is not something that will support greater adoption. But there could be solid state, could be something else. Right? So for us right now is looking at what's available today. NMC is easier, but NMC has challenges with regard to sourcing. Cobalt and manganese, again, have a very high geopolitical risk with China controlling a lot of that. At the same time, NMC, while a little cheaper than LFP, has some potential issues from a safety standpoint. Not a lot if you package it really well, but relatively LFP is a better technology. So we are going in with LFP right now. That allows us greater sourcing as well, or greater ability to source, because lithium is largely available. And even if you move to 100% EV across the world, there will still be enough lithium left to be able to get it without the geopolitical issues. So that's our approach right now. Over time, it may change. It depends on what the next new thing is in battery technology.
Thanks for the question. A lot of good NYU questions. I think we can have one good CMU question also.
CMU, so got you.
Good timing.
Just a question, expanding actually to the question he asked. So we've kind of entered a stage in the world where technology is kind of evolving quite rapidly, right? You listed around the evolution in batteries itself, but if you expand that, there are alternates already available to batteries as well. Your hydrogen fuel cells, CNG. You're also testing nuclear reactors, etc. Also in some places. Both from a financial and operational perspective, how does one now strategize allocation of resources to a certain technology, understanding what is going to be the time frame of it, what's coming next, etc.?
So great question, Harid. Our approach on that is don't allocate any resources to it. Let others do that. And that's the reason why we haven't gone into battery manufacturing as yet. We might do that to some extent in partnership with others. But at this point, that's really, again, been the partnerships we've had with Volkswagen, because they've got terrific technologies with regard to batteries and even motors. So we're leveraging their technology for that. And over time, we might partner with them to do more and potentially put in some investment as well, or with someone else. But at this point in time, at least, we feel very good about the partnership we have with Volkswagen, and we feel that we can do a lot more with them.
Thank you. Any more questions? Vaishali.
Good evening, sir. My name is Vaishali. I'm from Millennium MAMS. I'd just like to ask, with Mahindra Group being dominant in the agricultural sector, what is your view on the drone technology being used over there? And secondly, you did mention ABC to China to India. So how is Mahindra Group going to be globally competitive in that respect?
So great questions there again. Let me answer the second one first. With the new vehicle launches we have, today if you look at automobiles in India, you've got all the best cars in the world here from every manufacturer. Some have pulled out, but they've gotten their best cars here and then pulled out after that. And if we could compete with them and generate the kind of sales we have for the XUV700 and the Scorpio N, we feel very confident today we can compete anywhere in the world. Our first mandate, though, is to give our customers in India the deliveries of the cars they've booked. Right? The one thing that we're unhappy about is, while we love the demand has generated a 2-year wait for both of these cars. Right? And with the XUV700, even with a 2-year wait, we get 10,000 bookings every month. Wow. And we have to be able to fulfill that first. So that's what we're doing right now. We are actually looking at almost doubling our capacity. And that will help us sort of get there faster. Then we do want to go global in a much bigger way. So that's for automobile. Tractor, we already are global. We are in multiple countries. And it's about scaling up those countries as well. So clearly a lot of plans to go global on that front. And just come back to your first question.
On drone technology, your
Drone
views.
technology is not used as much today. It's still early. There's a lot of potential for it, not just in agriculture, but even in logistics, where we are in right now, and other areas. And I don't think we have done enough as yet, overall as an industry, to be able to leverage the power of drones. I think we can do a lot more.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully we get the XUV deliveries. My brother sitting in the audience suggested I message you when we wanted to buy it. I said, don't think I can do that.
In this, what we've tried hard is to meet customer committed dates.
Yes.
And therefore, we've had a very difficult time, and which is exactly why the first thing we want to do is try and get the capacity in and meet all those dates before it starts getting to be an even longer wait.
Absolutely. I think we've answered all questions. Anything else? Okay, a big round of applause for Anish. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Personally, the philosophy of giving up control to gain control is what stayed with me, and I'm sure it's resonated across with our audience. Thank you, everyone. I'll invite Rekha Koita to say the final words of thanks and provide the token of thanks to Anish.
Thank you so much. I think we've had a great evening. It's been very interesting to listen to you, and I think a lot of the things you said were very, very direct and very impactful. So really, I just also on a personal note, I've known Snehal and Anish for the last few years as friends, and I think it's been really nice to kind of come here and listen to your lessons in leadership. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Now dinner will be open, so please go ahead, grab food, mingle. Dinner's at the back. They just open the doors. Yeah.
So they're opening the doors, so we have, please stay on, and we have a nice dinner organized for all of you so that we can spend some more time and network, talk to each other, and enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks.